Hello, and welcome back to episode 11 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to focus on developing the piers of downtown. This has been a project that we've been talking about since very early on in the series, but I wanted to wait until Bridges and Ports and the Bikes updates released to truly begin work on this. In order to do this, we'll take a look at precedents from different waterfronts all around the world, identifying historic functionalities, modern tourism and leisure uses, and environmental forces, all of which shape the function, size, and assets of the piers. Lastly, I want to very carefully select the assets that we want to use as the foundations of our piers before building them out fully. But before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we toured our city. In the proper episode 10, looking through every single district that we'd built over the last few months as we developed this beautiful city of Lemuria in Veridian County. In episode 10.5, we went through a little bit of an overview of Bridges and Ports DLC, running through some of its different features and assets. Then we let our city simulate, and we made selective spot fixes all around the city, working on noise, building upgrades, and traffic flow to bring the city into modernity with the current state of the game. In today's episode, I want to plan our waterfront, first by establishing the general size in game, and then by determining our options using comparable cities. We left last episode off in a little bit of a rough state. We've got ambulances needed, hearses needed, lack of labor all around our entire map. But hey, if we turn all that off, our city is just as beautiful as it's ever been. Since the last episode, I updated to the Bikes update, from Bridges and Ports to the Bikes update, and that seems to have reduced our traffic enough. I also did some selective spot fixes at all these different locations, adding a couple more turning lanes here. See, this one has dedicated left turns now all around here, taking the traffic lights enhancement and putting that all around, and just applying that to a whole bunch of different junctions all around the city to improve traffic flow overall. One of the remaining large pinch points is right over here where Hawthorne Street meets Sunnyside Street, just right at the waterfront intersection, and that's kind of to be expected. This is a really major intersection without any sort of roundabout treatments like we have going on the other side over here as it meets Middle Street. But we seem to be pretty lucky right now at 4 a.m. in the morning where the traffic is really not all too bad. Although I'm noticing that this curve right here is a little bit janky, so let's fix that real quick. Oh yeah, look at all that raw pavement. This section of the city is really where we're going to be focusing our efforts for today. We've already got a fairly nice amount of piers over here through the East Asian Cultural District and through Old Town, and quite frankly, I adore how they look. But this is a very different style of pier than we're going to be doing through our main waterfront, because these piers were built fairly irregularly. I want our downtown waterfront piers to have a little bit more regular of a rhythm to them, and really be shaped around the assets that we select to put on the piers, rather than vice versa, placing the piers, then the assets, and kind of adjusting the piers in post. Currently, we have piers stretching all the way from Pier 5 up through Pier 40, which is this park that we have over here. And yes, it skips a whole bunch of numbers along the way over there, as piers very often do, but we've got a good arrangement of piers, and I think today we want to extend them through from the East Asian Cultural District over here, along the Waters District, and along the Central Business District. The Marina District is basically a large pier in and of itself, and it's so well shaped that I don't think we want to disrupt its geometry with a bunch of random piers sticking out. So I think we'll keep this untouched without any piers for now. We'll eventually add a marina into here, but that'll be in a future episode. For today, let's do some drastic terraforming work to establish the scope of our work. First, I just want to make sure our water sources are not directly where we're building these piers, and it's not. So now I can take a large strokes brush with our base terrain height that we have set out all throughout the rest of this area at 310 yards, and just totally fill this whole great big area in. Plain God over here. Now we're gonna have a whole bunch of smoothing out to do later on, and I'm trying not to touch this wonderful little beach that we have established for ourselves over here, but at least this is a good start to kind of establish how far out and where exactly we want our piers to go. This is going to be a fairly substantial addition to our city, and I'm not sure how far out exactly we want them to go, but I'm really over here just giving ourselves the playing area to lay out a whole bunch of assets, which we'll do later in the episode. This is basically the amount of room that we have to play with right now, so it is a fairly nice amount of city blocks, assuming that maybe every block or every other block will get one. We might have another 8 to 10 piers in here, I'll say. Something like that. Not really sure how it'll actually play out. But in order to determine how we want this waterfront to lay out, I think it's time that we look at some precedent cities. First, as usual, I want to start off in my hometown here in Seattle, where we recently completed a big whole waterfront renovation project. There used to be a 2-level highway, a viaduct, that ran and separated downtown from the whole waterfront, but that was recently sunk underground into a tunnel. You can see the entrances over here, and the surface was replaced with a big old surface road, and then a whole bunch of pedestrian access. You can see you got your main downtown blocks over there, your surface road with some parking on either side. Then you've got a bike lane, which is good because we just got bikes added to City Skylines too. Then you've got a whole big pedestrian access road with connections at each intersection, and then the piers based right off of that pedestrian access road. I think this is a very similar overall format to something that we want to do in our game. We probably want to have a similar layout where we have our big main road, where we have the trams and we have the cars, we have the nice trees down the median and the boulevard, but then I think we also want to have a little bike path, and then a whole bunch of little pedestrian facilities with some gardens and greenery, and then the piers branching off from that. Seattle's waterfront is somewhat unique from a lot of other cities in that it is a working waterfront. Yes, there are some sections that are really centered on leisure. Like over here we have Pier 62, which is a big old seating area, concert area and all that. You got your Overlook Walk, which is a park. You've got your aquarium, and then this whole pier, which is actually completed now in real life, just looks under construction, this overview, and your Great Wheel. All of this is really for tourism, but once you get outside of the tourist area, you have all of these different working sheds. You see Pier 56 over here, Pier, I think 54, I think that's Pier 54, 56, 55, 54, all these different shed buildings, which are really full of offices and machinery and industrial things. These are working buildings, not purely for tourism purposes. Then, of course, we've got our big ferry terminal and some industry. So people actually come down to the waterfronts to work, to live, to eat, to shop, for all sorts of different purposes, and I think this is something that we want to replicate in the city of Lemuria. One of the other big things about the city of Seattle's piers and waterfront is that it's deep with history. All these buildings used to be very industrial, used to be kind of like this, and you used to have train tracks that curved right into them, which is probably what this curve used to be, or maybe still is, like some sort of train track that connects up to the industrial network down here. All of these piers used to also have train tracks, and this whole waterfront used to be full of train tracks. You see, back in the day, look at these pier buildings. They look just like the ones that are there today. They might be those same ones, but this whole Western Avenue, this whole waterfront road is just streetcars and trams and trains to bring resources in to these ports so that they could be shipped out off of each of these different piers. You'll also notice that a lot of these piers are angled, and there is a reason for that. In fact, there's a sign on the waterfront pathway, I think right around here where my cursor is. I think there's a sign that explains why these piers are angled, and I have read it a number of times. Basically, back when the city was first founded, the piers were built in every which way chaotically like you would see in a whole lot of other cities. But in the Seattle Great Fire, which burned down a whole lot of the downtown that was built up at the time, all of these piers were also burnt down, and that gave them a chance to rebuild. When they rebuilt it, they rebuilt the piers at a perfect east-west at angle. So if I orient to north, you'll see that while most of the street grid in Seattle is east to west, north to south, the little bit of downtown is awkward for some reasons that I'm not going to get into during today's video. The piers are oriented east-west, just like the rest of the street grid and the rest of downtown. And this helps to prevent from some of the winds that come from the south. This helps boats that are coming in from the bay make it in a little bit smoother, and this helps train lines that are coming up make a more gradual turn in from the south, rather than having to do a tighter full 90-degree curve right off of the back. You can see that the gaps between some of these piers is kind of narrow. You can barely fit a couple of ships in there if you're lucky, some pathways, everything is super jam-packed and tight, but there are still some little gaps in open space that are left for storage, for cars, for cafes, and for beaches, and everything in between. So Seattle's waterfront is going to serve as absolutely the biggest precedent for the waterfront in the city of Lemuria. But let's move on to another city, and I'm going to head right down to San Francisco, which also has some piers, but they are much, much longer. Now, you might be wondering, why aren't Seattle's piers this long? That's because in Seattle, the ground drops off super steeply, so they couldn't actually build out because they would then have to drill these pylons, these poles at the very ends of the piers, down so much further. So if they cut them off shorter, made them a little bit stubbier piers than we have down in San Francisco, they were able to make them a little bit more sturdy in the water. San Francisco's piers are a little bit more unique, and it's not something that I've studied quite as much as I have Seattle's, but since San Francisco's piers are inside of a natural harbor, much like the city of Lemuria is, they're protected a little bit more from the waves of the Pacific Ocean, and they just have the smaller, softer waves here in the bay. This means that yes, while a marina still has a breakwater to protect from those waves, the piers themselves are able to be a lot more exposed. And I think that's just generally the look that I want to go for anyway. In San Francisco's piers, you do have some historic buildings that are working piers for the ports and for different industries, but for the most part, it is very touristy. You've got your ferry terminal here at the Embarcadero, you've got museums, you've got historic ships, you got playgrounds. Of course, you've got the famous Pier 39, which is just packed to the brim with shops. Plus, much like Seattle, you've got a really big waterfront road with bike lanes, with trams, just like we have in our game, and with a big old pedestrian side right on the waterfront for people to walk and run down. San Francisco, pretty similar to Seattle, just kind of adding to our repertoire of places to look at. Next, I want to look at New York, where you have less regular piers. You can see there's pretty big gaps in the piers running down the coast of New York City, but you do have a fair number of piers, and many of the piers in New York have actually been converted to be leisure piers. There's very few piers in New York that are still working piers until you start to get up to the north, where you have your ferry terminals with a whole bunch of parking. You've got some museums, you've got more parks, golf courses even, parks like Little Island, which is super cool by the way. If you haven't been there, totally recommend it. And just tons of green space that's been concentrated onto the piers until you get down to the financial district, of course, which is kind of like our marina district, where it just is built out in a whole bunch of infill and curves around the end really nicely. And much like a lot of these other places, you've got your big old boulevard, then you've got a bike trail, then you've got a park, and then you got your pedestrian walkway before it branches off into each of these piers. I think New York is once again another one of these places that we'll take some inspiration from, but it's a very similar style to the others that we've been looking at. And of course, just like Seattle and San Francisco, New York's piers are inside of a protected bay. They're not right out against the water, so they don't need a breakwater or anything. They can just be kind of exposed and placed at whatever direction is most convenient for the city at that time. The final place I want to look in today's episode is, of course, Hong Kong, which we take a look at every episode. Hong Kong is currently in the middle of redoing its waterfront to be a whole lot more leisure focused, but Hong Kong takes a completely different approach to what we have in Seattle, New York, and San Francisco, so I wanted to point that out here just for the sake of being able to do so. So much of Hong Kong City was built on reclaimed land anyway, that piers is kind of not really the focus. The whole city is a pier, kind of like we have in the Marina District. So you do have some smaller piers, but they're not really piers per se so much as just functional bits of the waterfront that jut out. For the most part, the waterfront is just a consistent development along the shoreline where it's turned into a park with some leisure buildings like the convention center that interrupt it before you reach this core of downtown where again you're just on so much infill land. Hong Kong's not really a place that I want to take inspiration from, but I wanted to show this to you as an example of what a different style of waterfront treatment could look like. One more before we return to the City Skylines 2 game. I'm sorry, I know I talk about these for such a long time, but I think it's really important to look at precedent imagery. Last up is Vancouver, BC. Vancouver treats the waterfront kind of similarly to Hong Kong, where there's a whole lot of industry along the waterfront, just like there are in, most cities, but then you start to turn into a little bit of a park that's interrupted just with your big cruise ship terminal, which I really like, then your convention center, much like Hong Kong, followed by a nice consistent waterfront park with marinas and all of this in a protected bay, much like we have in all the other cities that we've taken a look at. Vancouver doesn't really have a spectacular waterfront to walk along per se, besides Stanley Park, which of course is just gorgeous, and all of the different high rises having these great views. Vancouver has a lot of individual waterfront and smaller parks and all that. There's not really a consistent identity among them like we have in Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Hong Kong, all those places that have a very consistent treatment of the waterfront around downtown. Vancouver's a little bit more here and there, and I think that's a good philosophy to have sometimes, but we want to make a statement in Lemuria. So using all these different cities as precedent, especially Seattle with its working waterfront, its leisure, its ferry terminals, and all of this, let's get back to City Skylines 2 and move on with selecting our assets. And I think we want to select these assets by looking at the potential functions that a waterfront like the City of Lemuria's would have served in history and the different functions that it serves in the modern age. Unfortunately, I don't really think that City Skylines has the best assets for... Oh, look at that. Population's at 0 per hour exactly. Look at that stability. I don't really think that City Skylines 2 has the best buildings to really replicate this industrial historic look. I think there are a few that might be roughly around the right width of a pier that we could use, like this ground earth building, maybe even the dairy house, but kind of none of these other ones. Bridges Ports did add the Seafarers Shipyards, which is like ports in and of itself, but that's too big, as is the Fish and Seafood Factory. Although it's not much bigger than these other industrial buildings, it is pretty large, so I think we'll hold off on that for now at least. Just continuing to look through these different assets, I think this theater could look pretty cool. I don't know. I feel like a theater is a good use for a good fit on the waterfront. Plus, absolutely, this Forum of Arts building. There's also a chance that we can kind of stack up multiple of these in a row, because that really looks like a pier building that you'd see on like the Seattle waterfront. I really like that. The Deep Blue Oceanarium is a must. We need a nice aquarium up here. I think we could probably do with another theater, maybe. We'll keep that right next to this one as either a maybe we keep both, or maybe we narrow it down to just one or the other. Ooh, Bridges and Ports also added another portion to this aquarium. So maybe we can do something kind of like Seattle's and have a 2-building aquarium. That would be nice. Plus, it looks like there's a commercial place called Bait and Bistro, which literally says it's a waterfront eatery. So we absolutely have to use that around here. And that's it for our signature commercial. I can't really think that we'll want anything from the residential section, but I'll look through here anyway, just because some of these are cool enough that we can place down a static ploppable or even the building itself and maybe it'll work. Nah, those aren't the right fits for me, I think. If we get into the water uses, I don't think we want a full harbor over here, but I really like the idea of having a small version of the harbor, just kind of to set ourselves up for a cruise ship terminal of some sorts. So I'll go into my static ploppables and take just the basic harbor and place that down. This is a little bit of a static ploppable, kind of cool of a building. Then we're totally gonna need a ferry terminal for downtown. And now let's see what sorts of parks we want. I think we could probably place down some of these lighthouses, maybe at least the small one, just as a feature in the parks, but I'm not going to place those down right now at this very moment. This park literally says Dockyard Lounge, so I think we're going to have to use this park at least. Ooh, look at these Neo barracks from the large park section. This totally looks like it could be some sort of historic, industrial building especially with the sawtooth roof like this. Some sort of historic industrial building that's been converted into like a hotel. I really like that. And then let's see, we got a small Ferris wheel over here, but I think that feels maybe too small for a city our size. I don't know, it kind of works, but I know that there's a bigger one somewhere around here. Yeah, I really like the bigger one. I think we'll end up going for that. So put that one to the side. Oh, there's a community pool. It's kind of funny having your pool right next to the waterfront, but also it's that infinity pool idea, isn't it? I think we can go for that and maybe turn it into like a whole water area where there's a water park somewhere around here. There it is, water park. Oh, and I can maybe place down this old lighthouse rather than the small one. This old one would be cool. Now, I don't really know that this is the most appropriate place for it, but you can kind of maybe think about this old lighthouse being relocated to our waterfront for all the tourists to admire. And then, yes, I absolutely want this large Ferris wheel down on our waterfront. Now I'm just looking through the industrial buildings, and I kind of like the look of this industrial storage building. If we kind of stack that up backwards, and that can form a pier of its own. Something that's maybe like a underused or no longer used industrial building, or maybe it is still used just for some sort of storage on the waterfront. And I don't know if this is quite enough assets, but this should be enough to get us started. We've got some working buildings, like some industrial buildings. We've also got a bunch of parks and museums and all that, plus some ferry buildings and a harbor that's going to serve as our cruise ship terminal. So I'm sure that we'll add some more assets as we kind of fill in the gaps between these, but this should set the stage as kind of the foundation for the piers. So I think it's time that we move on to shaping the piers. In order to do this, we're going to want to consider environmental forces, ship sizes, and the waterfront road design. So let's start to think about how we want to do that. Kind of in line with what we talked about before, I think we're going to keep our nice big waterfront road, but then I'm going to add in this 2-lane bike path just to kind of keep that on the side of it all. And then I think we'll have our nice big pedestrian pathway, and I think we'll connect those in at each one of these different instants. Actually, I don't want to use that pathway. I probably want to use our real and proper, nice wide pedestrian street just to make our connections off of these easier, so that when we build our different ports and our harbors, which are going to require road access, we can just create the alleys right off of this pedestrian street. And then if I'm choosing between the shallow and the deep rib pattern for our piers, I think the deep is kind of cool. It creates this really nice cross section where the shallow is more of a texture that just goes on the side. So I think for now, we'll probably start with the deep rib pattern, and we're selecting which one of these roads that we want to use to kind of shape our pier. I think I'll use the wide key with pedestrian path, deep rib pattern. Yeah. Although I also debated maybe the concrete block, because those look nice, but I don't know, it's arguably a little bit flat. Either way, it should be somewhat easy to switch out at a later date. First things first, I'm assuming that we'll probably want maybe a little bit less separation than this. And then in terms of spacing, I think we might want something like this, where we have just enough room between the road and the bike path for some sort of little bit of bushes, but then between the bike path and the pedestrian area, we can have a little bit of a row of trees, kind of like we got going on in the center median over there, which means that we're probably going to be pushing out basically 3 to 3.5 units from the road before actually starting our piers. So that should be totally fine. And now it's time to organize all these different assets into the general shapes of the piers that we want them to look like. I think I'll start off with the Neo barracks, because I really like those, followed by our whole big waterfront water park pier. And then I guess since these are already here, let's just keep them there. And then maybe this Ferris wheel goes right next to the park. I think that'll work well, especially if we have to space these piers out a little bit more. I think it'll be nice to have the Ferris wheel right next to the park like that. And then if we're putting the Ferris wheel there, our aquarium definitely has to be right next door. But now I might be losing the plot on some of these industrial areas, so let's put in our ground earth. Maybe we put a theater out front just to kind of mask the ground earth from the whole nice beautiful waterfront public eye view. Then I gotta make sure that we're not forgetting about our beautiful harbor pier over there. Maybe we put a restaurant inside of there as well, just to make it a little bit more cohesive. And I can do the Forum of Arts. And I think I will kind of place multiple of these in a row so that we kind of get that effect. And I can finish off with, I think this is the dairy house, right? Just finish off with these last couple of buildings. Let's see, what are you? Oh, you're our waterfront restaurant, right? Something like that. I guess you can probably go at the foot end of the Ferris wheel just to kind of wrap up this parks district. Let's rough in those last few Forum of Arts. And I think this is off to a pretty decent start, but we're not fully there. We're starting to see how these piers might possibly shape out, but of course we can't forget the reason why these piers exist. It's for ships. And look at this, we got a whole lot more ships in the latest version of the Bridges and Ports DLC. Oh man, look at those. We got some real variety in the ships at this point. Some of them are pretty small, like these small fishing boats are really small. I think this net fishing boat is probably closer to the size that we'll want to base our historic piers around. If you remember in Seattle where I was talking about how it's a pretty tight fit, it's probably boats around this size. But then our cruise ship terminal will definitely need to be this massive passenger ship over here. And I think maybe some of our currently working industries will want to be based around these larger ships. So let's just rough in some ships in between all of these guys. And I'll use this to highlight wherever we have major conflict. And you know what? All things considered, this is not too bad. We're pretty well spaced just on my based on my initial placing. We're pretty well spaced to have room for all these different ships to maneuver around in there. I think we probably want to allow a little bit more space, especially on this side where you've got these much larger ships that I wanted to play with. Your parks can be probably a little bit closer because you'll assume they've infilled in some old ports. Like this Ferris wheel is probably 2 old piers just in and of itself, so it's a little bit more janky over there. And then everything off to this side is just generally smaller scale, so they can be a little bit tighter in. All things considered, I feel like I could probably even fit in yet another pier on top of this, but I'll leave it for now. I'll be content with how we're looking. Now the next question is, what sort of orientation do we want all these piers to be at? Do I want them to angle along with this waterfront road, or do I want them to angle north-south and kind of align with their main street grid that we got going on? I think that's what I want it to do. I think I want to use the street grid here in the central business district, which is kind of that north-south-ish orientation. I guess it's not technically north-south, but I'll use this orientation as the basis of all of our piers and kind of based off of that. That'll lead to maybe even some pretty cool Elm Street views coming straight down through to the water without a pier getting in their way. So let's make sure all these are angled correctly. And welcome back. That took me a little bit of time. You saw that I did a little bit more than just purely shaping the piers. I started to lay them out in their entirety, and look how good this looks. I am such a fan of this, y'all. Basically what I did is I started out by putting them generally in the places that I expected them to go, and then I drew out the actual waterfront pathway. As we discussed with bike lane and pedestrian pathway, then I actually found this concrete leisure pier, which I was planning on just using as a spacer to kind of figure out how wide this gap needed to be, but then I thought it kind of looked cool. Plus, I know that these leisure piers actually attract some tourism in and of themselves, so I'm hoping that we'll get to see some more people just walking down the waterfront for the sake of walking down the waterfront, and I hope that this leisure pier kind of accomplishes that goal. Plus, it looks kind of nice next to the bike path, right? And it just makes this ever so slightly wider before we start to add in our actual trees and our actual separator element, which you see that I started to draft out just a little bit over here. Then once I had that spacing out and could figure out where this pedestrian path would go, I made each of the connections into the intersections along the whole way, and then figured out how they would terminate on both ends. On the beach end, I didn't want to completely get rid of this beach, so I just terminated it kind of at a diagonal, heading into this giant intersection over here. I think this would be something that the city might get a lot of negative feedback for. Like, oh my gosh, why are you terminating this beautiful waterfront into this, like, gosh, whatever this ugliness is. And you can expect that, I don't know, I would expect that maybe we start to see some project for a lift up, like some sort of bridge to get up to this metro station straight from here, because that's really the biggest benefit of the connection on this side. This crosswalk would get a lot of use in real life, so you'd probably expect to see some sort of dedicated pedestrianized connection running all the way up there. Everywhere else, it's just a straight-in connection on the intersection, and on the other ends, I have it basically continuing. Ooh, it's not Forest Street, it's Middle Street, and I think that just renamed their whole waterfront, didn't it? Gosh dang it, City Skylines. We got Middle Street that connects perfectly straight away right down into the side of the pedestrian connection. That makes total sense. This is a nice little roundabout. It's only got 3 connections on the other 3 sides, so it's not all too bad. I think this side worked out pretty well. Then from there, I just started by aligning things back, so I pushed this back as much as it can, kind of started to space things out somewhat reasonably, and then once I had all the assets placed in and spaced in, you see that I've got some gaps because it just didn't make sense to have them spaced out the way I had them shown originally. Once I had them all placed in and spaced in, I placed in alleys on the south side of each of them. When I was mentioning how Seattle's piers are angled, it's because there's south and southwesterly winds. And so just to protect against some of those southwesterly winds, I'm theorizing that these would be a little bit wider and more reinforced. So if a boat did crash up against that side repeatedly, it would be a little bit stronger and more reinforced than these other sides. But in City Skylines 2 reasons, that means that we can have our car alley on the south side of each of these properties, which is really where we're gonna build the connections into these properties from. Each of these individual properties are going to have a connection off of this alley, and that's kind of going to be our helpful little car drive-in point. And then around all of that just is our normal pedestrian quay wall, which gets a little bit funky at the harbor section because this is a static, this is a real, this is a real, so it's gonna have I'm gonna have to figure out and play with this a little bit further, but this does the job at least for now, and it loops all around all of them. So the next step for us is going to be to turn all of these different pedestrian pathways into quay walls and then let the water flow back into there. This is the most exciting step because now it goes from these random weird land barges into actually looking like piers. So let's go. Uh-oh. Okay, I paused my game. I paused my game. So I had it paused while I was building all these things, and now I've cleared out all the land, and I unpaused it, and I had forgotten that the big rush of water back into this empty cavity is going to cause a tsunami. My gosh, what is this? Like a 20-foot tall tsunami just hitting everything. Oh no. Okay. Are we just gonna... I don't know. I don't think I have any other option. I'm just gonna watch the chaos happen. Just knowing that the water is going to subside eventually. So for now, I just have to deal with the tsunami. All right. I mean, it looks like there's a chance that it was isolated just to this one poor building over here. Maybe that one as well. I know that it's still got a whole lot more to fill in because everything is at the same level over here. Everything is this close to sea level. So seeing a gap this big tells me it's definitely got to slowly fill up all the way up to like there or so. And it looks like it's doing that. It's making its progress, but gosh, that was a scary moment over there. I think we might now be filled in. Sweet. We got ourselves some piers. And those look pretty good, but I do need to place my ships down in there just to make sure, because I realize that these paths are really wide, and I don't, like in some cases it doesn't make sense. This needs to shift back in. Oh, much better, much easier for the ships to load here. Now let's place down a few of these. We got to do this using the find it prop menu, just like we were doing earlier. And let's see how our spacing is. You know, I actually think we're pretty okay. All right, I mean, I'd say that's pretty good. I think there's a few somewhat tight spots, but It's not super unrealistic, you know? It's just a little bit tight. These gaps are a little bit smaller. That makes sense because both of these are leisure piers that were presumably expanded around this more abandoned industrial pier, and this one still has more than enough room on the other side for a super liner, which I'm going to use just as I flatten out the terrain around this beach. I'm going to make sure I don't make it too shallow where the super liner is. So these are all pretty helpful for a frame of reference overall. This is all looking good so far, so I just gotta finish filling in these green spaces with assets and of course connect up the roads to all of these, which is a little bit hard because I don't actually know where all the road required actually are. Seeing as it's floating out here and buildings like this ocean area are actually way over here. So a little bit hard, but I think I can make it work. I should be able to figure it out, or maybe reload the save will do it. We'll see. Next up, making it all functional and filling it in. And that's all of the green space filled in. Things are looking pretty good so far. I'm liking that we have such a wide variety in all the port assets. And of course, we're getting our lack of labor signs just like the whole rest of the city. And of course, it is also 11:18 a.m., which means that it is the daytime downtown. So we're getting a whole bunch of traffic jams building up in our downtown area, which is honestly, I like it. If it's clear during the nighttime and it's crowded and traffic during the day, then I feel like I've done my job, you know? I feel like that means that the city is actually alive. Oh, look at this little tram. Look at it. I did switch in between episodes. I did switch some of our trams. So some of our lines use both the 240 and the 40 trams. So it looks like right here we got a 40 and it's so cute. Aww. Look at the just single little tram car pulling up towards running through Grand Central. That looks so much more like a real tram than the little 40-person one. Aw, it's so cute. Anyway, during the daytime we're getting a good amount of traffic, and I bet that our new waterfront development and all the amount of people that are going to be walking around here once this is all opened up to the public is certainly not going to help that problem. But I'm just going to pause the game once again, because the final thing for me to do in order to complete our brand new gorgeous piers is the finishing touches. Finishing touches is going to be a whole lot of landscaping, a whole lot of detailing and surface work, and just prettyifying it up to make sure that all of these little bare patches are gone, all these little asset conflicts are gone, all of the different assets on a given plot of land or a given pier feel more cohesive, maybe even changing up the texture of these borders here and there, just making sure that everything is detailed to feel like a real build, rather than just a collection of assets all jumbled together. I think I've done a decent job of making it feel like everything is actually an intentional development, but we're not fully there yet in terms of making it feel totally functional and totally workable yet. I did just realize, while I'm speaking of function, that I never drew out our pier to have our little ferry stop, so let's do that. And there we go, connected that right up to our major seaway. So now I can actually build in my first route using the ferry line tool. I can connect one up from Pier 5 all the way to whatever pier we're going to call this guy. And we'll call it a Pier 5 to Downtown line. A little bit glitchy, it seems like, but hey, we got ourselves a line, and once I press play on the game, I assume that we'll start to get some ferries running out of here. That's pretty cool. Anyway, all that said, I think I'm just gonna continue on with another time lapse. Let's get on with putting our finishing touches on these piers. Alright, that took a little bit of time, but I think I'm done with the finishing touches at this point. I spent a good couple hours working on all that, putting them on all the piers, but everything is looking so much better now. Everything is just that much more cohesive. As you run down our waterfront, everything's got lights, you've got your surface textures, you got some stains, you've even got some fences around here, around this old abandoned pier. You know what else I'm gonna do? I'm gonna add in industrial blocks. I'll put in a junk car over there, maybe another junk over there, put some caution cones around like there's been an oil spill, plus a couple barrels, and suddenly that little bit of detail just adds a whole lot of life to the city. I've got morning voice now. It is another morning. This is like, what, 5 different assets all cobbled together? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different assets all cobbled together. And just by putting on this surface texture over here, it just completely unifies everything together. It makes it feel so much more cohesive, and it feels like it's an actual singular pier that extends all the way out for all this leisure. You've got the same thing going on over here for our aquarium. Suddenly they have the same unified leisure pier texture. You can probably guess that these two were developed around the same time. I did add in a couple of custom parks around here where I placed down some vanilla parks, like, what is this? This is the large playground over here. And then I just completely demolished it and replaced it with my own assets. I did that a few times around this pier. You got your big old movie theater texture. I don't know, something about this floor pattern feels so movie theater-esque. I don't know what it is. And then, of course, you've got your tree and sound barriers as you move into the industrial area. And oof, I'm using these Real Vision decals and they just look so good. Look at that view right there. Look at that view. You can't even tell this isn't real life. I mean, you can, but it's not the point. But it's got some more screening on both ends, plus you've got your big old industrial ships for cargo, for oil, for cargo, all that sort of stuff. You got your big industrial ships around the working industry, then you got your smaller ships everywhere else, just kind of lined up using the piers as dock. Of course, next you've got your main harbor. We have our cruise ship terminal, which you can see I used pedestrian paths to connect up into the boat to make it look like it's actually linked up and loading. Then I covered up the passageway parks with my own trees and assets, so you still do have your nice little walking path that snakes its way all the way through there, but it's a little bit more tree covered now. It uses the same consistent brick surfaces everywhere else, and it just makes a lot more sense. It unifies up with the brick that we have on the ferry terminal that I can't replace, so it all just feels a little bit more cohesive. Plus, I like having a little bit of nice green space. I did also touch up these assets a little bit. I put some solar on the roof and plus greenery on the roofs to kind of make it feel like this is a little bit more renovated, more cohesive between these two roof colors and textures. And it feels like a newer building this way, which is pretty cool. Then we've got our big Hall of Arts, Forum of Arts. I did place 3 of these, as I mentioned before, and they're all struggling for workers, but again, they've got this unified concrete pattern that runs all the way around the exterior. And these buildings are cool enough to actually have interiors. So if I head on through any of these doors, but I'll head on through these nice big front doors, you can see that it's actually got interiors with walls and with stalls for market people and people biking around apparently inside of the forum. I mean, sure, all right, go off. I guess you can get out of this glass door in some way. And once you do get out, you're greeted with these murals on the cinema. The cinema had a really big blank black wall, so I thought I'd just put a couple murals up there. I also did bring in a whole bunch of these ships because on one hand this is a working dairy house, but on the other hand I think it might like spawn some animals in or something like that. So I thought maybe it's also a tourist attraction where you get to pop onto one of these boats from the pier. And I don't know, maybe this is a little bit lazy. I have a ton of custom parks over here that I demolished, and I replaced them all with the same kind of fountain loop thing. I could have done a little bit more creative of park design, but it's getting to be a lot of detailing, and I think this will just do the job for now. It looks custom, it looks nice, and it doesn't kind of go over the top. It still keeps the unified texture. One of the other things you'll notice is that I did not differentiate the roads in any of my texturing or my detailing, because these roads are really just for functioning. I replaced my function only roads with a little dot in the name, so it feels a little bit less intrusive. But I put the surface texture right over top of the roads, because this is kind of how piers work in real life. If I look in Seattle, you'll see that cars have to drive like over the boardwalk, onto the pier and like weave their way around pedestrians. It's really a pedestrian focused environment, and the cars are only there out of necessity and because of some history with them. So you don't really expect to have the piers and the roads catered to the cars, although it's a little bit sad to see them actually being used like this. Stop it, garbage truck, you don't need to be on the pier. All things considered, I'm really happy with these piers, and with the finishing touches completed, it's the last segment of the episode. As always, it's time for the outro cinematics. My goodness, y'all, this build is another one that's just totally transformed our downtown. And it's so nice to see so many people actually using our beautiful waterfront. There's people walking in every which way. And if I turn on the route view, you can see just how much of a volume of traffic all these are conveying. Look at all that. I love seeing people using this. I think it's also going to integrate with our tram network. Oops, I'm in a building. It's going to integrate with our tram network really nicely. There's our tram coming on down. It's nice and full of people, and I bet there's going to be, yeah, some of our waterfront stops are among the busiest on the line, which I think is just a fantastic start of things. If I look from above, like, I feel like I can't even go back in time. I don't know what the city would have looked like without these piers. These piers just completely changed the way that our city's waterfront looks, and it looks a whole lot more complete now as we look from above. I'm still not fully used to them, to be honest. I'm still used to it just being a clean waterfront over there, but it feels like a real city this way, and I'm very happy with it. To me, this waterfront feels like somewhere that I would actually want to visit, walk around, and enjoy in real life, and I think that's just so special to me. Ooh, I wonder if we've got any actual ships coming on our ferry depot. Yes, we do. Our first ferry is on its way right now, coming around the ship pathway. It's just made its way past Old Town before it swings its way into the downtown ferry docks. Sweet. Pretty slow, to be honest. I'd expect this to be moving a lot faster, but alright, I guess it is a long journey from the piers. The final thing that I want to do before signing out in the episode is just to rename everything. Let's see what pier we got up to. We left off at 40 down here. And this pier would actually be a couple of piers in and of itself. So with this one, you can expect that there's been some renovations done to them over time. I'm actually going to go back on what I said earlier, and instead of renaming the roads just to dots, I'm going to rename them to the pier names. That feels like a pretty nice compromise. Oh, look at that. I'm just renaming this to Pier 54, but there's our first ferry. Look at it pulling up. I think, ooh, we do actually have some people who are making their way on. Look at that. Just sink their way through the totally realistic animation. Oh dear. City Skyline. And there we go. I skipped a few numbers in there because some of these are pretty wide piers. We made it all the way up to Pier 56. Oh, that's awesome. And that also means that our ferry goes from Pier 5 all the way to Pier 54. That's pretty good, to be honest. Plus, some of our major landmarks are on notable piers, like Pier 49 for the Ferris wheel, but then Pier 50 for the aquarium. Pretty nice number, all things considered. And the reason why we're up to Pier 50 over here, where Pier 40 is over here, and there's definitely not 10 in between, is because presumably they left some space, the port left some space for the fact that maybe some piers could be constructed along this branch, so that's why you kind of skip some numbers as you get up to Pier 45 over here. It's not a science, it's just I've approximated it, and if you have a better idea, then feel free to let me know. But with all those changes done, our cinematics complete, our project complete, that's it for this episode. We've just done yet another pretty awesome project in City Skylines, and with all that said, I want to thank all of you for spending your time watching me today. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.